has been so much fun. I wanted to tell you have a little bit of fun with you tonight and talk a little bit about the campaign and the work that I did with Donald Trump and getting to know him and what kind of man he is, because I came to admire him greatly. And by the way, he was not, I think, like most people in this room, and I'm not even going to think that maybe everyone in this room supports Donald Trump. But I will say this, that, he was maybe my third or fourth choice. I was, working for Rand Paul, and then I did stuff for Ted Cruz and did some work for Jeb Bush. And I had never met Donald Trump. Remember this time a year ago, there were, 16 Republicans running for president. And I knew 15 of the 16. The only one that I had never met was Donald Trump. And it was almost a year ago I got a call from my friend Corey Lewandowski, who was the original campaign manager for Donald Trump, and asked me if I would like to meet with Donald. And I said, yeah, I was really curious about what was going on. And by the way, it's so interesting. Here we are, March 6th, 2016. And just think about, if I were here a year ago and I had told you that Donald Trump was going to be the next president of the United States, you all would have thought I was smoking something, right? I mean, the odds, if you look back a year ago, the odds that Donald Trump, because there's odd makers, they said that the chances that Donald Trump would be president were 4%. 4% a year ago. But anyway, he was just getting started and he was drawing big crowds, and I went to see him. And I have to say, I instantly, the guy is an amazing person. He's larger than life. He's incredibly charismatic. He does have an ego the size of the Grand Canyon. But he's fun to be around, and he's an incredibly insightful person, and he has that business. It's exactly the reason that you've been such a great mayor of this city. When you put somebody in charge who knows how to run a business and knows how to meet a bottom line and knows how to meet a payroll, that makes a big difference. And so anyway, I instantly liked Donald Trump a lot, and he asked me to be a senior economic advisor. And I'll tell you one kind of interesting story. I was sitting there with my friend Larry Kudlow. Many of you know Larry. He's one of our best economists in the country, and he and I went to see Donald Trump together, and we sat across the table from him, and he said, I'd like the two of you to serve as senior economic advisors for my campaign. And Larry and I kind of looked at each other, and we said, well, wait a minute. We said, Donald, we can't do that. We're for free trade, and you're not. And it was really interesting, and I think this is a real compliment to Donald Trump. He said, look, first of all, he said, I'm not against free trade. I want fair trade and free trade, and I thought that was an interesting perspective. But then he said, look, if we disagree on this issue, that's fine. He said, I want your advice on energy policy and tax policy and fiscal policy. And I just thought that's a good characteristic to say, look, we can disagree on some things. You don't have to agree on 100% with me. I want you as part of my team. And so, I signed up, and I have to say, the last 3 months of the campaign, if you want to see America and understand what's going on in America, you go out on a presidential campaign. And one of the things that I discovered, and this isn't going to surprise anybody in this room, but I discovered this in spades. The people who live in Washington, D.C., the people who live and work in Washington, D.C., and the people who live and work in Wall Street, and the people who live and work in Hollywood, and the people who live and work in Silicon Valley are living in a bubble. They have no idea what's going on in real America. And, it was so interesting. I would go to cities like York, Pennsylvania, and Flint, Michigan, and places like Rockford, Illinois, and many areas in the Southeast. And, I'd say to these folks, what do you think about the economic recovery? You know what a lot of people would say? What economic recovery are you talking about? Because for a lot of Americans, there has been no recovery, and it's working class Americans. And we as free market conservatives, by the way, one of the roles of Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, the Alabama Policy Institute, is to support Donald Trump when he's doing the right thing, but just as importantly, to give him a little kick when he's doing the wrong thing, because we have to sort of be the conscience of Donald Trump. But I think one of the things that's so important, we need to show as free market conservatives that we have solutions to the problems, whether it's in the inner cities or working class neighborhoods where factories have left, that we can bring enterprise and we can bring jobs and opportunity back to these areas, right? I mean, that's what we believe in, and that's why I love what API is doing. But I'll never forget one of the trips I took with Donald Trump. We went to this little, I traveled a lot with Donald Trump, but I also did a lot of what they call surrogate events, where I would do events for him. And there were, about 100 people who did these kinds of surrogate events for him. And they sent me to this little town in rural Ohio. And I'll never forget this. We flew into Dayton, Ohio. And when you go to Dayton, you think of Ohio as being the Rust Belt state, all these industries and so on and smokestacks. But actually, Ohio, when you get out of Cleveland and Youngstown and Cincinnati, it's a very rural state. It's a very agricultural state. And we drove, I'll never forget, my driver picked me up at the Dayton airport, and we drove about an hour straight west towards the Indiana border. And every little town was like Mayberry RFD, one little town after another after another. And I'm looking out the window in these towns. By the way, these towns were so small, a lot of them didn't have traffic lights. A lot of them didn't even have a McDonald's. So we're driving for about 45, 50 minutes, and I turned to the driver, Joey, and I said, Joey, this is unbelievable. I said, we've been driving now for almost 45 minutes, and all I have seen is yard signs, Trump, 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 everywhere. And I said, this is unbelievable. I haven't seen one Hillary Clinton sign. And I'll never forget, we turn around a corner, and sure enough, about 4 houses down, there's a big blue Hillary sign. So I say, oh, never mind, Joey, there's one. So we get a little closer, and Joey says to me, Steve, take a little closer look at that sign. It said Hillary for prison. So the point I'm making is that, there is a big divide in this country, too, among inner city and rural areas. And those people in the rural areas really felt a connection with Donald Trump. I just want to tell you one other kind of fun story from the campaign, because it was a lot of fun being with Donald Trump and going on the plane and so on. And people always ask, what was it like being on the plane with Trump? And one thing that I just found so interesting is when you'd be on the campaign trail, you'd go to an event, you'd get off the plane, you'd have that police escort, it'd take you to the auditorium or wherever you were going to, the stadium, and then he'd do a speech, and then you get in the police escort, you go back and get back on the plane. So you never had any food, so you'd always get hungry. You never had a time even to get a candy bar. And so I always thought this was so interesting. The first time I was on the plane, I was like, this is great. Donald Trump, he's a billionaire. This is going to be great. We're going to have lobster and caviar and champagne on this plane. And every time I flew with him, the cuisine was always the same. McDonald's Big Macs for lunch and Domino's Pizza for dinner. This is the guy who has the common man's touch. But anyway, one trip we took was to Oklahoma. And, you mentioned, Caleb, this is a football state, and you are second to none, obviously, in football with the Crimson Tide. But we went to a fundraiser in Norman, Oklahoma, which is obviously the home of the University of Oklahoma. And many of you, do you all remember the old football coach Barry Switzer? Do you all remember him? I think he won 3 national championships with Oklahoma, and he's a legend there. I think he was the coach for the Dallas Cowboys, won a Super Bowl. And he's an old, grizzly guy, and he's hunched over, and he's always, he's kind of crotchety, and he comes up, and he doesn't look any different today. He's probably about 75, 80 years old, but doesn't look much different today than he did when he stormed the sidelines. And we walk into his house, because this fundraiser was at his house, which is right across the street from the Oklahoma Stadium. And we walk in, and I'm actually, just by chance, I'm standing next to Donald Trump. And who's standing there to greet us? And there's about 250 people in his living room, but Barry Switzer. And he runs up to us, and he's like this, and he goes up, and before he says anything, he sticks his finger right in the chest of Donald Trump. I've never seen anybody treat Donald Trump like this. And he says, Donald, I just want to tell you one thing. And I'll clean this up a little bit, because he said, I just want to tell you one thing and never forget it. Never fumble the football. Never fumble the football. And I thought, well, that was so great. And then we spent the rest of the day, and I remember we got off the plane at like 1:30 in the morning in LaGuardia, because this guy is inexhaustible. He'd go from one city to another. And I'll never forget, I said goodbye to Donald, because he was going off to the Trump Tower, and I just said, Donald, we've got 4 weeks to go. Never forget what Barry Switzer told you. Don't fumble that football. And it was a great story.